Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, "You are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power."
Hotep, which in the language of ancient Egypt means we come with justice in peace. Welcome to Freedom Now, a Saturday Pan-Africanist and Internationalist World Affairs program. Freedom Now is committed to the principle of the rights of all peoples and nations to self-determination. We thank you deeply for your contribution to KPFK, which permits programs like Freedom Now to stay on the air. In this era of corporate acquisition and co-optation of all dissident media, we provide the microphone, challenging their corporate and racist point of view. So stay tuned for Agenda here at Freedom Now.
Habari Gani. This is Sister Tej with Freedom Now's agenda for this Saturday, April 4th, 2026. 58 years to the day Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Today's central theme is in his honor, is breaking the backbone of imperialism, its wars, and addressing their grave histories of enslaving Africans. We commence today's program with our sister Luyanda Kuboka and the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar. Our guest today is Banbose Shango, former leader of the National Network on Cuba, a Pan-Africanist and internationalist organizer, and he joins us today to discuss Cuba and Venezuela and their axis fighting U.S. imperialism. And later in the hour, we go to a clip from Deutsche Welle News with our co-producer, historian Dr. Gerald Horne, alongside Deutsche Welle correspondent Isaac Khalidzi, both commenting on the United Nations declaration that the slave trade was the gravest crime against humanity. And we close out our program with a statement on reparations in response to the United Nations vote from Billion Godson with the Africatown Coalition here in Los Angeles. Our music clip mix includes MLK, Zatmama, Orishas, Madison Cali, Childish Gambino, McCoy Tyner, Bob Marley, Kashdami, Kirby, Prison Radio Commentaries with Mumia Abu Jamal, and more. So sit back, phone a friend, and as always we stand ready for revolution.
There's the slave trader. Let's talk to him now. Go on, call to him.
Hey, Mr. Schultz, mind if we freshen up a little too?
Hello, boys. I'm glad to see you. It's you, because if you know how to treat them, they're not a really animal like people say. What they need is a good master. Like me, for example. You see, my profession has also its noble side. Some people call us peddlers of human flesh, zealous of souls. No. When you have a good conscience like mine, this work becomes a mission. Don't think for one moment as this is a lucrative profession. What do you think, for example, I make on this mail? $40 to $50 if he doesn't get first a hernia, yeah? And with the female sister saying, oh, this wench, I think I'll do better with this one. I paid $250 for her. But I should get $650 for her if Zambak fattens her up. And perhaps $120 a dozen. They'll bring $250 on the market. So you'll say, a profit of 80 to 120%. That's not bad. One moment, it's 420 miles from here to the market. And who pays for the ones who escape and the others who die on the way? If 1 out of 3 gets there, I'm lucky. Then feeding, clothing, castrating, the lousing, whipping, then the taxes, the tolls, the highway robbers, the fever, then my health, my family.
Molweni Ekai, this is Sister Luyanda Koboka with the historical drumbeat calendar for the week of April 6, 2005. April 6, 1959. Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, South Africa was founded by Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe and others. April 7, 1743. Toussaint Louverture was born in Haiti. April 8, 1870. Lenin, the father of Russian Revolution and the first socialist country in the world, was born. April 8, 1787. Africans leave England to return home to Africa and to establish settlement in Sierra Leone. April 8, 1928. Mary Tape, early emancipated Chinese woman living in the U.S. who worked against segregated schools for Chinese children in the 19th century San Francisco, is born. Menachem Begin begins one of the many massacres of Palestinians in village Deir Yassin to depopulate Palestine of Palestinians, thereby providing a settler colony for European Zionists. April 9th, 1966. Zimbabwe's African National Union begins armed struggle to decolonize Rhodesia from European settler control. April 10th, 1947. First meeting of Pan-African Trade Union of Dakar, Senegal. April 11th, 1977. France sends over 1,500 troops to Zaire to stop a rebellion in Shaba province. April 11th, 1981. Massive uprising in Brixton, London begins in demonstrations against police harassment and racism. This has been the historical drumbeat calendar for Freedom Now, KPFK 90.7 FM, 98.7 FM in Santa Barbara, and streaming live at kpfk.org. For any questions or comments, you can contact us at freedomnow@kpfk.org. And in the language of our freedom fighters in South Africa, we want to end with Amandla Awetu, Amandla Awetu, Amandla Awetu.
It's only when they begin their history in their state of freedom that they can come to properly understand their role. Thus, all Africans in America who begin their history in 1619 can never solve the problems they face. Those truly seeking to solve their people's problems must begin their history in Africa.
We want to free free from misery. We want to live like human beings. We don't want to live on dumb amongst dead dog and fly. And after you fight junker from sky to get food for now. We want to live like any other man. You believe we come here willingly. You believe we want we pick them to grow up in a place worse than have pain. We want to free.
This is Sister Tej with Freedom Now, and we're honored to be joined by Banbose Shango. He's the former leader of the National Network on Cuba and a longtime Pan-Africanist and internationalist organizer. Banbose spent decades analyzing U.S. imperialism in the Americas and the Caribbean, documenting struggles for sovereignty in Cuba, Venezuela, and across the global South, and advocating for global solidarity rooted in anti-capitalist, anti-colonial principles. And in 2012, our Freedom Now ancestor, Didan Kamati, and yours truly, went with Banbose on a delegation to Havana with the African Awareness Association. And in 2019, Banbose invited me to be a delegate at the Anti-Imperialist Conference in Havana, a conference of immense international solidarity, one I'll never forget. It was such an honor to be present there with all our comrades from around the world. Thank you, Banbose. And so today, he joins us to give an inside perspective on the ongoing crises in Cuba and Venezuela, the resilience of revolutionary movements, and what lessons these struggles hold for activists and movements fighting imperialism worldwide. Welcome back to Freedom Now, Banbose.
Thank you so very much, Tej. It's always a pleasure.
Ditto. And so to get started, we wanted to start with Cuba. And so as Cuba faces an unprecedented energy crisis rooted in an effective U.S. blockade that has led to widespread blackouts and economic strain, how should we as internationalists and Pan-Africanists understand this moment, not just as a humanitarian crisis, but as a continuation of U.S. imperialism aimed at undermining Cuba's sovereignty and revolutionary legacy? And what implications does this have for anti-war and anti-imperialist movements globally?
Sure. This is a very cruel move on the part of Donald Trump to asphyxiate Cuba, to actually strangle Cuba. He wants to go out as the president who eliminated Cuba as a great example for the world. I think that what we are seeing, this period where one country can unilaterally decide to punish another country, to invade another country, to bomb another country at will, is a completely unique historical situation. In this century, not many countries have been able to do that, and have been able to do it as frequently as the United States. However, this embargo has put a serious hurt on the Cuban people, which is either as great as or even worse than what they call the special period in the 1990s when the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet Union, being their major trading partner, forced the Cuban people back in history to be able to survive under that new dispensation. However, what it also did was release the creativity, the creative genius of the Cuban people, and allowed it to flourish to such an extent that you had a whole host of new pharmaceuticals coming out from that period, a host of solidarity moves where Cuba was able to create a space to help the world produce doctors and medical technicians, and then send them back to their country to serve their people, something the United States have never done. And not only that, but Cuban doctors have served in places where, frankly, many countries, especially the United States, were scared to go. During the Ebola pandemic, during COVID, during hurricanes and different natural phenomena, Cuba has served the people of the world very well, and they have done such a great service to the people of Africa and African descent throughout the world that we, our people, owes Cuba a special debt of gratitude. And it's a debt of gratitude that cannot be like the 40 acres and the mule. It's a debt that must be cashable. Unlike the debt the United States owe us, which we have not been able to cash, even Martin Luther King have noted that the U.S. owe us and we ain't been able to cash the check. So I'm saying that for all the groups of people in the world, especially the Africans and African descendants, those services that Cuba has provided to us is something that we owe Cuba a debt for. And this is the wrong time to be standing on the wrong side of the line, hoping somebody else will help Cuba. It is up to us. It's up to Africans. When Cuba helped Southern Africa eliminate the apartheid government of South Africa, when they did that because of the defeat that they gave to South Africa in Angola at the Battle of Capo Carnavalis, I think that they, at that point, showed us a striking example of solidarity. And they will tell you, when Cubans left Angola, those that left only took with them the bodies of their fallen comrades. They didn't steal nothing. They didn't borrow nothing. They left the society in a better shape than when they came. And many of them got married to Angolan men and women and stayed in Angola. But as an example, if the Battle of Capo Carnival did not take place, we might be still living under apartheid today. So we owe Cuba, if nothing else for that. We owe them for the medical service that they have given. We owe them for the CC Puede education program, which has helped schools throughout the world speed up and advance their literacy rate in their countries by millenniums. So today, I'm pleading, I'm begging the African community around the world to quit pussyfooting around, to quit being the errand boy for Donald Trump and his Secretary of State. So what if they won't give you a visa? So what if they don't like you? We owe Cuba, and we must pay that debt. So I think that Cuba in the past week have gotten 2 shiploads of oil from the Soviet Union, from Russia, which is a great help, but they still have a problem of infrastructure repairs because they can't get parts for their electrical grill, and that even the amount of fuel they've gotten from Russia will only last a couple of weeks. China has helped in trying to bring solar power to Cuba, and Cuba, which had about 4 or 5% solarized, basically their education and their hospitals are now able, because of China, to look at 20% solar power within the coming future, and probably more. I think that the fact that the Russian ships broke the gasoline embargo must become an example to countries who have gasoline and was going to send it. Mexico, you can do the same thing. So now is the time to show Cuba what real solidarity is. We must remember there's no road to solidarity. Solidarity is the road.
Right on. And with that solidarity, next, Cuba Venezuela, that access. And so given the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, that's cut off much of Cuba's oil supply and precipitated this crisis, what is the strategic importance of the Cuba-Venezuela alliance in resisting this U.S. domination in the Americas? And as you mentioned, the recent shift, including the limited Russian fuel deliveries, and also the recent shift of evolving diplomatic negotiations. What do these tell us about the resilience of anti-imperialist regional solidarity?
I am very optimistic. I think that Venezuela is a perfect example. They bombed Venezuela out of the blue, killing over 100 people, including 34 Cubans. They kidnapped and trafficked the president and his wife from Venezuela to New York, where he's being held actually in solitary confinement with the needs for health care, etc., that both he and his wife are not getting. And I think that it should be understood that they wanted Maduro. They came to kidnap Maduro. And Celia Flores, the outstanding combatant that she is, said, "You ain't taking my husband without me." And they said, "No, we don't want you. We just want him." And she said, "He ain't going without me." And that's how they ended up with both Maduro and Celia Flores' wife. I think that there's only one position that African people and the rest of the world can take at this point, and that is that Maduro must be freed unconditionally and returned to Venezuela. And it was an illegal operation that kidnapped him, and they had a practice of doing this. You must remember that they also kidnapped about 4 years ago Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab, who plane stopped in Cape Verde, and the U.S. got the Cape Verdeans to arrest Alex Saab, on the grounds that there was an Interpol warrant out for his arrest. But in fact, the Interpol warrant was not issued till 2 days later, after he was arrested. And again, he was kidnapped and trafficked to Miami, where he was held in bondage until they needed him to trade for some American mercenaries who tried to pull a coup d'etat in Venezuela some years after his arrest. But this system thinks that it can make laws nationally and internationally. It also thinks that the rest of the world must obey America's laws. This is called extrajudiciary legal processes, where they're saying that if we say you cannot spend money that Cuba paid you for medical supply, and you try to spend it, then wherever you go to change your money into U.S. dollars, into petrodollars, will fine you as the sovereign country for trying to spend Cuban hard-earned money, or as they would say, trying to break the sanctions. So you have Venezuela, which was on the sanctions since 2016. Now, before that, there was a attempted coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez in 2004, which was like 4 years after he came to power. And when the coup d'etat went down, the first and major country to support the so-called new government was the United States. However, the masses of the people in Venezuela went and got Hugo Chavez. The military joined them and took him out of the jail. They had him in a little island off the coast of Venezuela, being guarded by Venezuelan guards. They took him out of jail and brought him back to Miraflores, the capital, the presidential house in Caracas. And then after that, they had an attempted oil coup where they tried to both seize and sabotage the Venezuelan oil country, Petro de Venezuela. And they continued up to when Hugo Chavez died. Many people think he died because of something that the United States did to him. We don't know exactly what, or somebody knows. However, then they decided that they don't want and don't like Maduro either. So they've been trying to overthrow him, to do regime change against him for years. We were fortunate to be election observers at the last election, presidential election, that he won outright. But there was so much sabotage that the computer equipment stopped working, that the woman, Maria Machado, says that they won the election. She announced that 2 days before the vote, and the U.S. agreed with her that she won the election, and it was 2 days before the votes were even cast or counted. And they did all kind of computer sabotage to try to overthrow him, but they could not. He obviously won the majority of the vote, and the people did not rise up, which they expected after putting out all their propaganda. And so the only thing that they could do was this illegal kidnapping. And I again say, for us as Africans and for the progressive and revolutionary forces of the world, we have to call for an unconditional release of President Maduro and his wife. and he must be returned to Venezuela.
Thank you. So with what you've just covered, also kind of talking about opposition forces such as the US and other ones kind of on the ground with the new interim leader, Delcy Rodriguez. So alongside the mixed reactions within Venezuela's social movements, what is your analysis of the internal terrain right now, from the working class struggle to these opposition factions? And how should Pan-Africanist and global left forces abroad orient themselves to avoid reproducing capitalist or imperialist frameworks in solidarity work?
Well, I think that the best judge of the Party for Socialism in Venezuela is its membership. And if you look at Venezuela, the masses of the people have been in the street since January 3rd. They've been in the street every week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week, en masse, demanding the return of Maduro. And they themselves have not done what the left in the U.S. and other places have been trying to do, which is accuse Delcy of selling out, etc. I think that she has a delicate balancing act to perform right now, and that the best help that she can get is the return of Maduro. I think that the people in the party there has not said she is sold out, and they have not abandoned her. And while I'm an observer of the party, I am not a member of the party, and I cannot take that position for the party. I don't think that with all the forces that are fired up inside of Venezuela, that she could sell out. So she is trying, I think, to ensure that right now they don't lose anybody else to any surprise bombing from, the nut in the White House. But I think that if we want to understand what's happening in Venezuela, then we need to really ask the Venezuelans, ask the people who support Maduro, ask the people who are part of the party. They're here. There's a Venezuela Solidarity Network that's very active in New York. They're almost out in front of the prison every week demanding Maduro's release. There are people across the country as part of the Venezuela Solidarity Network, and they're all over the internet. I don't think they're hard to find, so folks really have no excuse for asking them, and they should remember what the Chinese say. The Chinese say no investigation, no right to speak.
Right.
They say no participation, no rights to interpretation.
Well, that's a good note to end on here as we were out of time. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't cover before we sign off?
Well, I just wanted to thank you very much. I want to encourage folks who have never seen a real million people's march to consider going to May Day in Havana and see for themselves. And also, while they're there, talk to the people, and you won't have to listen to Fox News and CBS and ABC and NBC and the rest of these special capitalist media. So thank you so much, Tej. As always, it's been a pleasure. Keep on struggling.
Right on. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Banbose Shango, former leader of the National Network on Cuba and longtime Pan-Africanist and internationalist organizer. Thank you again.
Thank you.
This is Sister Flora, and you are listening to Freedom Now at KPFK 90.7 FM in occupied Mexico, including Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego, and streaming live on the web at kpfk.org. Today's program, as well as 10 prior editions, can be reheard at kpfk.org/audio archive, and scroll down to Freedom Now. For a truly alternative international perspective on world affairs, check out RTTV Russia, CCTV China, and online at Presna, Latina Cuba Telesur Venezuela, News 24, South Africa, and Press TV Iran.
And up next, prison radio commentaries.
Hello, Daniela Clita. I want to send my solidarity to Daniela. And really, this remarkable turn of the state, I call it back to the past. You know, you've heard the movie Back to the Future. This is back to the past. And the state is acting like it's 1972 or 1980 again. And it is clear that this is a political prosecution against a person for their past associations and their actions in which no one was hurt, no one was injured. So it's clear this is a political prosecution. So free and acquit Daniela Clete, and, you know, let's come on, you know, to the present, okay? This is not 1972. This is not even 1982. It's time for people to turn the calendar and live in a new century. This is capitalism trying to punish people who had beliefs that they disagreed with years ago and could not touch. And they're trying to punish them for their beliefs. Come on with that. Free Daniela Clete, acquit Daniela Clete. All right? It's about time. Danke sehr. With love, not fear. Hier spricht Mumia Abu Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio. Hey, listen, I want to salute all of you guys and gals at ALC, the Abolitionist Law Center, for an incredible win before the state Supreme Court. You know, as I told some of you, they piped oral arguments through most of the jails in Pennsylvania. Now, I'm partial and I'm biased as hell, so I thought you guys did an incredible job. But, you know, of course, over the months, guys have been like chewing on my ear, giving me their other reason why it would never happen. You know, you guys made it happen. And I've heard news already when I was doing my job earlier this afternoon. I congratulate all of you for an incredible piece of work with Derek Lee. Well done. Well done. Love, not fear. This is Mumia Abu Jamal. Thank you. These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
Hello. How you doing? This is Mr. Eddie Treadwell from Cotton Correctional Facility here in Michigan Prison. And I just want to talk a little bit about genocide, right, in our urban community, right? And we all well know the definition of genocide is the destruction or destroying of a human race, you know what I'm saying, a race of people, right? And this more so is others who are involved in this process to, feeling that they're more superior than those, and for various different reasons they feel justified in trying to oppress and impose their will upon others, right? But this particular genocide that I want to talk about is the genocide that we pose upon ourselves. You know, we destroy ourselves and each other, you know, with our actions and the things that we do. Instead of us, people always have the tendency to always want to look at others and point the blame at others, right, for what they're doing to us. But what are you doing to yourself? You know, what is your worldview? You know, how do you view yourself and how do you view the community? You know, and how can we change the conditions in which we find ourselves? If we want to change the world, we first must start with changing ourselves. You know, so I'm making this speech based upon my true desire to get up, get out, and get some, and get involved in the process of change, right, within our community, because the children are the future. We have to teach them well and let them lead the way, right? But we don't want them to be raised up and growed up where they see violence, where they're waking up and see somebody getting stabbed down the street, hear the police car riding over here, the drug dealers running over here, stick-up men going over there. See, this type of environment is not conducive and beneficial for the growth and development of the people, of our children, of our race, of our city. So we have to start somewhere to try to come up with solutions to these problems. And I'm quite sure that all these intelligence and intellectuals that we have out there in society have the ability and knowledge to create something that will help transform our community into one that's more beneficial for the growth and development of the people who accompany that space. And I don't think it's a difficult task. They just have to have people with a desire and a will to make it happen. And it's definitely going to take some finance because you got to rebuild. But that's an issue of the world. There should be no poor people on this whole earth. We got enough resources on this planet to support every living being on the face of the earth. But we choose not to for various different reasons, and we justify our reasons why we don't. We want to get the haves and have-nots. So just take that in mind and think about the next time you look around in your community, what can you do to change it? Don't be good for something.
These commentaries are recorded by Prison Radio.
And now we'll go to a clip from Deutsche Welle News with an interview with Isaac Khalidzi and Dr. Gerald Horne addressing the United Nations vote to declare slavery as the gravest act against humanity.
A historic vote at the United Nations on slavery.
Therefore, draft resolution A/80/L48 is adopted.
The UN General Assemblies declared that slavery is the gravest crime against humanity, specifically the enslavement of some 12 million Africans and their descendants through the transatlantic slave trade. The resolution put forward by Ghana was harshly criticized by the United States, where tens of millions of descendants of enslaved Africans live today. We'll be talking about that later on. First, I want to hear the reaction from Ghana. DW correspondent Isaac Khalidzi is in the Ghanaian capital, Accra. Isaac, good to see you.
Thank you, David.
So before we talk more about this historic vote at the UN, let's just look at what the resolution says. The resolution calls the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity. It calls for UN member states to engage in dialogue on a full and formal apology and for reparations as a concrete step toward remedying historical wrongs. The resolution also urges the prompt and unhindered restitution of cultural items to their countries of origin. 123 countries voted in favor of the resolution. 3 voted against it, including the United States. And 52 countries abstained, including the UK and all of the European Union. So, Isaac, let's start, though, with Ghana. How are people there reacting to the news?
So a lot of people have been following this particular campaign for a long time, like 3 years ago, but this year it has been intense and people have been following, and a lot of celebrations in terms of people being happy about the fact that eventually their president was able to lead this campaign and the UN has adopted this resolution. So the reaction has been positive. People have been happy about the development today.
And Isaac, Ghana has been pushing for this resolution for a while now. Tell us more about what's behind that.
So Ghana has been the epicenter, really, of this whole narrative about slavery because the country has several castles and forts, and many of them were used in the this slavery trade that took place many centuries ago. And across the country, in fact, we have 2 of the key castles, the Elmina Castle and also the Kepo Castles, where people always come to visit to see the devastation that took place because of slavery. And seeing this edifice there and trying to remember exactly how our forefathers actually had to struggle and be taken along the oceans to other parts of the world as slaves, it's something that really keeps people thinking. And I think that this drive or campaign for reparative justice actually is anchored on that we see the remnants of this and we think that something ought to be done, especially even with the issue of securing formal apology from countries that really carried out this particular activity, and in a way having some reparative justice for victims. So this has been ongoing for 3 years now, and eventually we've gotten to this point, driven of course by the passion of the current president who wanted to get this resolution adopted.
And Isaac, let's listen to what UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said about it.
Today we reflect on a deep betrayal of human dignity, the abduction of millions of Africans, stolen from families and communities they would never see again. I've often said the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity that struck at the core of personhood, broke up families, and devastated communities. I welcome the steps some countries are taking to apologize for their role in the evil of slavery and to join an honest dialogue about its lasting consequences.
Now, Isaac, the resolution calls for reparations for slavery. Are there any specifics on who should be paying reparations to whom?
Okay, so in the resolution that was actually sent to the UN by the Ghanaian or the African team, I should say, the reparation, the demand is that it should be paid by countries that undertook this practice and countries that also benefited from it. So like you mentioned in your introduction, the US of course benefited, so they obviously should also partake in paying, and some European countries really who took part in this slavery trade, they ought to pay the reparation. Now, the question has been to whom, and of course that has been one of the key issues why some countries like the US, or even for example the UK, decided not to vote in favor. They, according to the team, they're not asking for money to be paid to African countries or governments, no. They're asking that they should be channeled into a fund that obviously helps to correct some of the imbalances that we've had in the current world because of the slavery, and also to be able to ensure that people who really have been victims of this slavery can be able to heal again and be able to rebuild, get the tools, the skills they need to be economically empowered, so that we can bridge this disparity when it comes to economic fortunes across the world. So that is really the model that they are trying to propose. They are not asking that the money is to be given to government, but they want it to go towards targeted campaigns that helps to correct some of the anomalies that has taken place because of the slavery.
And it sounds like that there would have to be a lot of discussions about exactly what those reparations would look like. Isaac, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Let's go to the U.S. now. Gerald Horne is a professor of history at the University of Houston. He's published dozens of books, many of them about slavery, including The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. Gerald, so good to have you with us. What's your reaction to this resolution being passed?
Well, I think it's a significant step forward. Certainly, it'll be quite useful in the United States of America because, as you probably know, there is an ongoing struggle for reparations to the descendants of enslaved Africans. You may also know that the administration of Washington, D.C., speaking of that led by Mr. Trump, is unequivocally hostile to this question of reparations. And I would also like to give a note of celebration and victory, indeed, to the president of Ghana, Mr. Mahama, who is walking in the footsteps of the founding father of this West African nation, speaking of the late, great Kwame Nkrumah. And all around, I think it's a significant step forward.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about reparations in just a second. What does this resolution mean on an emotional and symbolic level for the African diaspora, specifically for people whose ancestors were enslaved?
Well, I think it's quite profound. we in the United States oftentimes recognize that since the population of African descent is a distinct minority, perhaps 13 to 16% of the overall population, we've also and often needed international support and international validation in order to make a step forward. And I think that this resolution at the United Nations is precisely the kind of validation that we have needed in order to propel this movement for reparations, in fact.
So you're saying that basically African Americans, in a sense, needed Ghana to put this resolution forward?
Oh, absolutely. As you may know, the United States is known quite properly as a conservative country. You may also know that polls suggest that a significant percentage of the non-descendants of enslaved Africans are hostile to reparations. They are represented in Washington by Mr. Trump. And so in order to move the needle, we've needed this kind of international validation, which we've just received at the United Nations.
Now, over 50 countries did abstain in this vote, including the UK and the entire European Union. 3 countries, including the US, voted against the resolution. And one reason the US named is that calling slavery the gravest crime against humanity, it said, would create a hierarchy of crimes against humanity, essentially saying that enslavement is worse than other crimes against humanity, including murder and rape and torture. The U.S. ambassador to the UN said, this is not a competition. What's your response to that?
Well, as you probably know, the African slave trade involved murder, rape, and torture. You may also know that the African slave trade lasted for hundreds of years, from the 1500s up until the late 19th century. You may also know that there are still reverberations and repercussions of the unlimited African slave trade in terms of the United States of America, in particular in terms of spiraling rates of incarceration, high rates of unemployment, spectacular rates of infant mortality and death for children. So I think that the resolution in many ways is right on point.
Gerald, I do want to play a few clips from the UN General Assembly debate on this resolution and get your response. The first one is Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama clearly taking aim at the US and at Donald Trump.
Black history courses are being removed from school curricula. Schools are being mandated to stop teaching students about the truth of slavery, segregation, and racism in American history courses. Books about those topics are being banned in schools and public libraries. Museums, art centers, and other institutions whose budgets rely in any way on public funds are being prohibited from scheduling exhibitions and programs or from displaying materials promoting racial awareness or Black history. At the very least, they are slowly normalizing the erasure. They're slowly normalizing erasure.
That was Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. Now let's hear what the U.S. ambassador to the UN had to say.
The United States strongly objects to the cynical usage of historical wrongs as a leverage point in an attempt to reallocate modern resources to people and nations who are distantly related to the historical victims.
U.S. Ambassador Dan Negria speaking there. Gerald, what's your response to this idea that it's too late for reparations called for slavery?
Well, I disagree ferociously. In fact, as you may know, there is a principle of U.S. law which suggests that when there is a wrong, there should be a remedy. The wrong was the enslavement of millions. The remedy is reparations. And in any case, I was rather mystified by the fact that the U.S. ambassador spoke of countries receiving reparations when in his own backyard in New York City, there are millions of descendants of enslaved Africans who are living in desperate poverty as we speak, as direct relationship to the crime against humanity that was the African slave trade.
Now, you are also a lawyer, so I want to ask you about another criticism brought up by the U.S., and I'm quoting Ambassador Negria here. While we acknowledge the horrors of the past, The United States also does not recognize a legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time when they occurred. Gerald, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that that's a questionable invocation of law. And I might also go a step forward to suggest that next in line for reparations, at least in North America, are the descendants of the indigenous population, the Native American population, who were subjected to genocide, which was the condition precedent to dragging Africans in chained across the ocean to work for free. And certainly it's rather disappointing, I must say, that many members of the European Union voted against this resolution concerning the African slave trade. Now, I know that they want to stay on the good side of Mr. Trump, but even having said that, I think that the ultimate and the utmost of cynicism is the vote of nations like Britain and Portugal and Spain, whose current standard of living and current modernity is attached and connected directly to the unlimited African slave trade.
Gerald, you've mentioned reparations several times now. What else do you think needs to happen at this point to address the wrongs of slavery and their ongoing impacts on people today?
Well, I think that Mr. Mahama, the president of Ghana, laid out many other issues. For example, as he suggested in his riveting remarks, there's an ongoing campaign to not teach what happened during the time of slavery. And I speak to you as a person who teaches this issue. That is to say that it is said to be indoctrination if you talk about the horrors of slavery. Obviously, what's at play is the United States would like to portray itself as a shining city on the hill, and it's difficult to make that kind of distorted picture if teachers are teaching about the horrors of the African slave trade. And so certainly education, a dedicated campaign to educate people, not only in the United States, but I would insist globally, about the horrors of what befell Africa in particular.
Gerald, moving forward, how do you see this resolution impacting the conversation about slavery and its effects?
Well, I think it'll have significant impact. As you probably know, there is a chain of Black radio stations in the United States of America. I am certain and confident that this will be a subject of discussion on these radio stations. There are also numerous Black newspapers. Those newspapers will be printing columns, I assure you, about this resolution. And inevitably what happens is that these kinds of issues spread from the Black press into the wider U.S. mainstream, and thereby it becomes a powerful tool for education.
Professor Gerald Horne, thank you so much for your time.
It's time for a new Mississippi. A Mississippi where we don't just walk towards the future, but we make amends for the wrongs of the past. And it is in that spirit that the state of Mississippi has decided to award those that are direct descendants of slavery and racial injustice in this state their due reparations.
Granddaddy was a farmer with skin as dark as night. He picked a cotton. My granny was a teacher with European features. Skin was lighter, and they had worry for their portion. They had no money for the toilet. I got one hand on the cross in the Bible. Devil comes like a thief when you're idle. Take the land, take the man and the title. Reparations. I ain't talking about no dollar. Reparations. Yeah, my people want their power. Reparations. When I'm gone, don't give me flowers. Reparations. When you know what's yours is ours. My people want no favors. Ain't asking for no handouts from my neighbors. Don't need no no conversation, just proper compensation for our labor.
Greetings, Freedom Now family. This is your brother and comrade Billion Godson of the Africatown Coalition. I am offering our response to the recent United Nations resolution A-APRP declaring the transatlantic slave trade and racialized chattel slavery as the gravest crime against humanity. We do hold similar concerns as other Black Americans about the timing of the resolution, those who presented the resolution, and the absence of American freedmen who have been championing the push for reparations here in the United States, such as the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, CJEC, Attorney Camilla Moore, who chaired the nation's first ever California Reparations Task Force, and other contemporary reparationists. The Africatown Coalition sees this UN resolution as a global validation of both the historical crime that was executed against our ancestors and the continued racialized crimes we are experiencing in real time today. 123 nations stood on the right side of history and called for an end to the ongoing effects of this crime and for real remedies to be taken to repair those wrongs. Unfortunately, 52 nations, including the European nations that participated in the transatlantic slave trade and racialized chattel slavery, abstained, in addition to 3 nations, the United States, Israel, and Argentina, who voted against the resolution. The Africatown Coalition sees the UN resolution, which calls for the members within its body to provide remedy for those who were or are harmed in their regions, as potential support to overcome the denial and delaying of our reparations claims here within the United States. In California, after vanguarding the push for actual reparations policies, California American freedmen were betrayed by the California Legislative Black Caucus, CLBC, who blocked 2 necessary bills presented by Senator Stephen Bradford to establish a Freedmen Affairs Agency and to have California begin a fund to pay descendants of people who were emancipated from U.S. chattel slavery. Last year, the CLBC continued the betrayal by presenting a bill to further deny and delay our repair with a bill for California to further study this matter for another 3 to 5 years. CJEC has managed to get 2 disaggregation bills passed in California to identify those of us who are descendants of people who were emancipated from U.S. chattel slavery, and currently has Assembly Bill 2723 to establish the California American Freedmen Affairs Division within the Office of the Secretary of State, moving through the legislative process. The Africatown Coalition also believes there is potential with people in California who come from any of the 123 countries who voted in support of UN Resolution A-APRP to be allies and assist American freedmen in securing our long overdue repair, just as we have assisted many of them in their journeys to becoming Americans. Lastly, the Africatown Coalition calls on all American freedmen who hear this to get involved. In the city of Los Angeles, the Lineage, Equity, and Advancement Project, LEAP, has a proposal for a Freedmen's Bureau to be established in LA that will soon go before the LA City Council for consideration. Currently, there are similar actions taking place across the United States. We will obtain our reparations from all who have been involved in executing the gravest crime against humanity against us. I can be reached at billionis55.com and or I can be found on social media as Billion Godson, BILLION and or Billionis55. That's Billion is the numbers 55. Ready for the revolution.
And in closing, we'd like to thank our guests. Thank you, Banbose Shango. Thank you, Billion Godson. Thank you to our producers. Dr. Gerald Horne, Brother Brandon, Sister Flora. Thank you to our board op Sly and all those who made today's program possible. This program, as well as prior programs, can be reheard for the next 60 days. Go to kpfk.org, audio archives, scroll to Freedom Now, and stay tuned for The Signal coming up next with our brother Dino. And signing off for Freedom Now, this is Sister Tej, and as always we stand ready for revolution.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.
Power to the people.